Hi everyone, Editing Renee. Before the video you're about to watch, I didn't include a book that wasn't one of my top reads, but it was one of my top reading experiences. So I should have included it. I didn't make a superlative for it because I wasn't thinking of it as like a top memorable read, but the reading experience was top memorable because I read the new Rachel Cusk. I got it as an ebook through NetGalley, and I read it as a buddy read with Nathan from Nathan's Nook. My first buddy read. And because we were doing this over socials and with time differences, Nathan is living in Korea, we left voice messages and texts, and the voice messages were so cool because sometimes they were left overnight for me and for him. And if you want to, and I mean, this goes without saying really, but if you want to enhance a reading experience, especially of a book that is not, I don't know, straightforward. I can't think of the word I want to use, but is more, it leaves spaces. It doesn't answer all questions. It really leaves you to fill in the gap. You're starting paragraphs, jumping into groups that are already established. And I loved the feedback that we gave each other, and it really enhanced the experience. So I look forward to at least one buddy read in 2025. I loved this one so much. I would recommend it highly for anyone. And now I'll drop you into the video. Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well. It's December 23rd when I'm recording this, and I started to see end of the year favorite books of the year videos. And I just finished reading what I knew would be the last book that I'd read this year. It's a fairly short one. And because I have other longer reads on the go, like my brother's Karamazov. So I thought, oh, this is a great time to take a look at all the books I've read this year and start to put together my thoughts on my favorites. That's like a really fun thing to do. If you don't have a booktube channel and you're just watching this, if you keep track, try to do the same thing. Look at your reads and even break them down in nonfiction, fiction, whatever, and put together your thoughts too, because I want to hear all about them in the comments. So I keep a Word document, and I've done this since 2020. And I write down the book, the author, and like what I feel my reading experience was at the time. And that'll change. Like I look back on what I read at the beginning of the year, and there's some books that I said like were excellent, but when I think back on them now, I think like, I don't know if I still feel like they were excellent, but whatever. So I read less books than I have over the last couple years, like 25% less. I reread this year, which I never do. I think the last book I can remember rereading was Charlotte's Web when I was in elementary school, and I read that to death. And there's probably a couple others in that vein that I would reread. That's my history in rereading. I'll get to it. I did reread some things, and I'll get to why. But anyway, so this isn't so much a like my 10 favorite books of the year as it is me finding some of my favorite books and reading experiences and discovery of authors, and finding the name of a category to put them in. So as I'm talking about them, these are in fact my top reads of 2024. First one, an author I've been meaning to try and finally did. Now, there were a whole bunch of authors that I mentioned in my, I don't know, 10 classic books or 10 classic authors I want to read this year video at the beginning of this year, which I'll link below. And I don't think I got to any of them on that list. Maybe if Henry James was on that list. I don't recall, but I did. Just move my little snowman guy that's sitting on my books. I did, in fact, read a Henry James, and I really like this one. I can't say Henry James is someone that I'll be turning to again. I've got a couple of his books that I've picked up at the thrift store. I did like this one. I like his just plain speaking writing. And because I'm a super fan of Brandon Taylor loves the Bostonians and teaches college classes about Henry James and specifically the Bostonians. As a matter of fact, his latest book, The Late Americans, is somehow not based on, but maybe influenced by this book. So, yeah, I hardly remember it now, but I do remember it being like, I like this author. I like how he's trollop like, but less comedic, but very approachable. So I'm glad I read that. But here's one of my favorite reading experiences of the year under this category of an author I totally meant to get to, and I finally did. And I just finished it. It's the last book that I'll finish in 2024. And that's Clarice Lispector's An Apprenticeship or the Book of Pleasures. What a weird title. Who's the translator? This is New Directions, translated by Stefan Tobler, with an afterword by Sheila Heti. It was worth it to me, as I was about a third of the way in, to start reading the afterword by Sheila Heti, because I knew I was only going to read a little bit of the afterword and it would give me some context, and it really did. So this is a story about Lori, a primary school teacher, and she meets Ulysses, a professor of philosophy. An opportunity opens when she meets him, a chance to escape the shipwreck of introspection and embrace the love, including the sexual love of a man. Her attempt, as Sheila Heti writes in her afterword, is not only to love and to be loved, but also to be worthy of life itself. I think Lori says something in this book. I didn't catch where she said it, and I'm not going to repeat it um, correctly, but she says something like being born gave me made me alive, but it was up to me to make a life. It's like so paraphrased, but like how profound is that? There is a lot of existentialism in this book. Why are we here? It's totally up to us to make a life. She only knows how to live life through pain and fear, and she's learning through Ulysses, who she's attracted to, but Ulysses is also discovering himself, like his inner self, like what is his life really about, and not wanting to have superficial relationships. He's trying to find and go deeper into himself too. And he has said to Lori, I really want to be with you, but we both have to look deeper in ourselves and be more open to all that life has to give and not be closed down by fear and pain and past experiences. That's such an abbreviated version of what this book is about, but that's why it's called An Apprenticeship, because she's getting together with Ulysses. He's philosophizing, and then she's looking for and actually experiencing pleasure, not from other people, but from life itself. She's allowing that to happen. And how being open does mean that you're going to be open to pain and loss and fear, but also all the other glorious things, joyous things that life has to offer, and that sometimes you have to dig deep to find. So that they're more than superficial experiences. I have so many tabs in this book. I could talk about this one for a long time. Let me see if there's something I can pull out of it quickly. So one of my favorite scenes in this book is when Lori goes to the ocean and it may be freezing. I get the feeling that it was very cold water, and she decides to just go in, and that she's all by herself, and that going in, and she actually tastes the seawater, is so awakening and invigorating. It changes a lot of things in her, and I could totally see that. Like the way that Clarice Lispector writes that scene is so relatable. You can really feel what Laurie is experiencing. There was the sea, the most unintelligible of non-human existences, and there was the woman standing, the most unintelligible of living beings. Since the human being had one day asked a question about itself, it had become the most unintelligible of the beings in whom blood circulates. Uh, it's understandable. It is questioning life itself. So, but it doesn't get too heavy, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. I think this was the perfect Clarice Lispector for me to start with, and it is one of my favorite books that I've read this year, and I just finished it. So you never know. This category, early to mid 20th century female writers. And so I read for the first time this year, and this happened in January, Edith Wharton. I visited my mother in Florida, and we went to a flea market, used books place where I always pick up a book. And I picked up this Edith Wharton, The Age of Innocence. This was my first Edith Wharton. I started reading it on that trip. And then that led me to read another one, which I don't have here, probably The House of Mirth. Edith Wharton writes about high society and some middle society, New York Gilded Age, for like nobody else. I loved this one. I loved The House of Mirth just as much. She likes to do the high-low thing. Um, the development of characters, the way that she's drawing from her own experience. I think this one won the Pulitzer Prize. I can't recommend Edith Wharton enough. If you read in that time period, most of the books that I'm reading that are in this time period tend to be British writers. So the fact that I'm reading an American author was really cool, and I'm so happy that I've discovered Edith Wharton. Can't wrap up 2024 without Virginia Woolf. So I had read Virginia Woolf last year, and this year I read To the Lighthouse. I hadn't read her for about a year and a half. I've read her first novel that was published, I think. I can't remember the name of it, but I'll put it here. And then I've read Mrs. Dalloway. And I read this one this year, and it re-stoked my absolute fire for Virginia Woolf's writing and her stellar ability to relay the interior human experience of men and women. And I love this version, this cover. So then this is where the rereading came in. I went back and read Mrs. Dalloway because this really fired me up. And because I feel like I had just gobbled it up the first time I read it, like 2 years ago. And it was so much richer this time. I can't recommend rereading enough, because especially if I feel like I super enjoyed something, but I know I gobbled it up. I read it really fast, and it was so much more rich. I was marking all the pages in the copy that I owned that I don't have here. And then I do want to go back and reread that first one that I'll put here that I'm drawing a blank on, because I am blown away by her life, her very short life, and her the tedious work that she put in to develop characters. And the more I read about her life, the more fascinated I become. I feel like this may be the year that I get a used copy of her journals or diaries, like volume one. I know that there's a couple people that are reading them, and I think I'd be fascinated by that. So yeah. Um, and then the third woman author in this category that I'll mention is Dorothy Whipple. I read Someone at a Distance. I would love to find a used copy, like a really inexpensive used copy of this beautiful cover, this book. I think it's Persephone. And I loved this story. I love this time period. Now, um, this may be really mid-century, but in the development of both young characters and older characters, and the introduction of the someone who's coming from a less wealthy background interacting with some wealthy people, just the whole dynamic. I think I read it over the summer. I really loved it. And then lastly, rereading, I read um, Penelope Mortimer again. Now, this is like in the night. I think these were published in the 1960s, so a little past mid-century. But I reread *The Pumpkin Eater* and *Daddy's Gone a Hunting*, uh, and something about the dynamic that Penelope Mortimer can uh, put on the page, the difficulties, the everyday difficulties of married life and real life, and the facade that was even more important to put on in upper class or upper middle class um, life, and some really tough choices that have to be made, um, that are reality. And so the grittiness of these stories in uh, produced in a or encased in a literary writing is just mind blowing to me. I am so glad that I invested the time to reread both of these, because I know that I inhaled these when I read them the first time, because I connected, like I just loved her writing so much. An unexpected gentle delight is my next category. And the book I want to highlight here is Ronan Hessian's Leonard and Hungry Paul, that I learned about from, I think, Bob the Bookerer. I'm sorry if I'm wrong about that. If I'm wrong about that, I will put a correction here, but I don't think I am. I heard him talk about it. I got it out of the library, and Leonard and Hungry Paul are two friends, and Hungry Paul is a little more quiet and antisocial than Leonard is, but Leonard is a gentle person himself. And they're friends, they're grown-ups, they're both living with their parents. They have full lives, but they aren't dating anyone, and they like to get together and they have their routines as a friendship. And then I think it's Leonard meets someone, and oh, I'm starting to get a little choked up as I'm thinking about it. Oh, do yourself a favor and read this book. If this is the kind of book, if it sounds like the kind of book that you might need sometime, just go out and get it and have it for that time. Uh, yeah, highly recommend. The next category: memoirs, memoirs, memoirs. So earlier in the year, I started to get back on NetGalley, which I don't know. Sometimes NetGalley divorces me, and sometimes we get back together. I don't know, because I don't like to read things on an e-reader. But for whatever reason, I I don't know. I got back on NetGalley at the beginning of the year, and then all of a sudden, I'm reading things like Splinters by Leslie James. Excellent. It's a memoir that is about her marriage and pregnancy and then having a baby while she's trying to continue being a writer. And I liked how she struck a balance between real life, like real life, having the baby, struggling afterwards, trying to maintain this relationship. Are they just together because of the baby, and finding time to write? That may sound like you've heard it 1,000 times, but the way that Leslie James spins a tale, even in a memoir, is really worth checking out, I think. And then one of my favorite memoirs, I mean, it's hard to pick, but okay, I'll say two of them. Sloane Crossley's Grief is for People. She's writing specifically about her longtime editor and friend who passed away. There are details around that that I won't go into, but how she illustrates through her experience at that time that um, our loved ones who pass away aren't perfect. And number one, there's all kinds of things that go through your mind about people who aren't around anymore sometimes. And yeah, so you could have wonderful memories, but also not so wonderful memories. And um, how she's clinging on to something that's totally unrelated from the death of her friend, but she finds herself clinging on to it because it um, is a the clinging on to this physical thing is a stand-in for it is a way for her to grapple with the hole that somebody leaves when they're gone, and it's a forever hole. So I found that brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and real because it's a memoir. So, and then Committed by Suzanne Scanlon. Um, this was after I reread another reread. I reread Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, which was so worth it to me because I hadn't read The Bell Jar since I was a teenager. And I thought I remembered it, and it was so worthwhile to read. And then I read Committed by Suzanne Scanlon, and she ended up having a breakdown when she was in college. And the story around that and her experience in a hospital was excellently done. She brings in other resources in that story and or in that memoir, and one of my top reads. Um, and Salman Rushdie's Knife. I have never read a Salman Rushdie. I, of course, knew about the tragic event at Chautauqua, um, but he recounts it so brutally, yet in a literary sense, the only way that Salman Rushdie can. He made notes after the attack, and the way that he captures the minutes, hours, days, months after the attack, and how he thinks about it, how he thought about it then, how he was readying himself for a trial, possibly with the attacker. It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And the next category, classics for a reason. So I cannot wrap up 2024 without mentioning me finishing The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. I didn't start and end this in 2024. I started it in 2023. I read some of this. I listened to it on audio anytime I was in the car because I found an excellent audio version. I'm not very much an audio book person anymore, but somehow that really worked here. And then I read almost the rest of the book after I got halfway. I read it instead of listening to it because I was just loving it on the page, and I could see I was coming to an end. I did not want to leave Hans Castorp and Air Settenbrini and Madame Chauchat. I didn't want to leave any of them. I really was sad to finish this book. I read the H.T. Lowe Porter translation. I know there's lots of talk about different translations of this book. I loved it. I highly recommend this translation. It has stuck with me in a different way, in a more lighthearted, but I don't know, I feel like I'm choking up about this book now. It stuck with me just as much as Tolstoy's War and Peace, because I took as long to read this, except I wasn't reading it necessarily every day. So beautifully drawn, so funny, satirical, and human. It's so worth the journey. It is definitely can be a very slow read, something you read a little bit of every day or every week. I'll list the audiobook version below because I really loved the pairing of it. So, yeah, I can't say enough about my experience with the Magic Mountain. Another top read for me this year that I'm super glad I got to was Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I know I've read a James Baldwin before, but it was like back in the 90s, and I was never able to track down which book it was. It might have been Go Tell It on the Mountain. I feel like it probably was. And I have never stopped thinking about that voice, and yet I never got to another Baldwin until this year. And Giovanni's Room is tiny, short, and so affecting. It is has to do with two men. I'm even forgetting where. Is it Paris, Italy? And it might be Italy. And Giovanni is someone who the main character has fallen in love with. But of course, at this time, their relationship has to be hidden and they have to pretend to just be friends and have girlfriends. And um, I didn't know how it was going to end. I was rooting for them. It's one of those things that you see a lot on BookTube, Giovanni's Room especially, and I'm so glad I finally got to it because it was such an emotional experience that I'm glad that I had. A genre I think isn't me, then I read in that genre and wow. I have to talk about Jacqueline Hartman's I Who Have Never Known Men. This is like sci-fi dystopian light. I don't know. Is it sci-fi? It's dystopian, which is also another genre that isn't me, so to speak. But I also read last year The Wall by Marlon Haushofer, and I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know it was dystopian, and I adored it. This was the same way. I have not stopped thinking about this book. This book comes into my mind frequently. When was it written? I don't know, 1960s, 1980s? I don't recall. I've been looking for another Jacqueline Hartman book, but my library doesn't have any others, so I'll have to pick one up used. I love the way that the author takes the leap of never explaining anything. You don't know how we got here. You never know. And that's fine. I can't stop thinking about the book, so that tells you something. You're dropped into a situation, you are given enough information to be able to picture what's going on, but you don't have any context about the before. And by the time you're done with the book, you're wondering about the after. The um, conversations that develop over time amongst the group of women that the book is focused on become more richer and richer as time goes on, as the main character who starts off as a young woman becomes older. um, I can picture the landscape that these women found themselves in after the what? We don't know. But I'm not going to reveal any more than that, other than it's a short book. It's probably one of the things I would recommend at the beginning of the year, like a palate cleanser, but like it's going to blow your mind. So I don't know that it's a palate cleanser. It's easy to understand and it will leave you with a lot of questions. And it's beautifully written. Debut novel. I read a few debut novels this year, but here's the standout: The Practice by Rosalind Brown. This is a story about a college student, a female college student, and she has a boyfriend who she's trying to spend time with, but I don't even remember now what she was studying. Is it music theory? I don't recall, but she needs a lot of time. And she loves going deep in her studies, but she really loves hanging out with this boyfriend. And you see that, you feel that struggle. But the coolest thing about the book is these two characters who she spends time with, but they're in her head. And I don't recall who those are, but I'll list them here. And she sometimes, they appear while she's outside walking around in the snow, and they have conversations. That is hard to do well, and I feel like Rosalind Brown does it well. It was an atmospheric book. Like, I could picture exactly the college campus where she was, and I could also picture these two characters that aren't real but kind of are. Yeah, I highly recommend this book. And then finally, authors in my back pocket. The list keeps growing, but it just gets better and better for me. So by the end of 2023, Leo Tolstoy was definitely, or Russian authors in general, definitely were going to be in my back pocket. So at the beginning of 2024, I read Anna Karenina over a period of about a month, and I really needed to be back in Leo Tolstoy's world. And I liked Anna Karenina, but I was still missing War and Peace. So that was fine. But yes, Russian authors are in my back pocket. I'm going to add Virginia Woolf now to that category. Happily add Virginia Woolf to authors I want to have in my back pocket. I mean, there's a much shorter oeuvre from Virginia Woolf, but I'm going to, but that's become more prevalent now. And then the author that really takes the cake here nowadays is Anthony Trollope. So I started reading the Palliser series this year. I thought that I I mistakenly began the series with this book that I'm still reading because I'm reading it super slowly, Phineas Finn. I thought I completely skipped over Can You Forgive Her? So I picked it up the other day at a used bookstore. I talked about it in a recent video. But then in this list, I have here that I read it in April, Can You Forgive Her? But it's super chunky. I must have started, but I don't know. I don't think I did. I don't think I read it. So I have that to look forward to after I read this. It all started back in like March of 2023 when I took The Warden, which is the first book of the Barsetshire Chronicles, with me on a scuba diving trip. And I fell in love with his writing. And I'm stretching it out as long as I can. And it really isn't even intentional. I just read a little bit of this at night, and he writes really large books, but they're series. So you get the benefit of having reoccurring characters. I love him more than Dickens. I have not felt the same attraction to Dickens, although Dickens doesn't do series, so maybe that's it too. But Trollope is so much more self referential, and he's breaking the third, fourth wall all the time. And the satire, he doesn't take himself very seriously. Yep, this is the author in my back pocket. It used to be, for a long time, it used to be Anita Brookner, and it still is in a way, but Trollope's going to win it this year. So please make up your own categories and tell me what your favorite whatever is in the comments. I would love to hear all about them. You know, a genre I think isn't me, then I read it in that then I read a book in that genre. Wow, like I want to hear about that for sure. And anything else, just let me know what some of your favorites were this year. What were some of the surprises? What author did you try that you're now hooked on, um, or can't wait to discover more about? So you're really like excited to continue in 2025. Thank you for being here in 2024. I really appreciate any of you who are watching and have clicked the subscribe button to see me again. It's so cool. I can't believe it. I really treasure that. And I cannot wait to see you in 2025. Happy New Year to everyone. And I'll see you in January.